Good morning, and thank you all for coming this morning. Unfortunately, the person who was supposed to do the presentation had another engagement he had to attend to, so you're stuck with me for this morning. Hopefully I'll be able to do a good enough job for you. So this morning we're here to talk about kind of an estate planning issue, something that most of us will have to deal with at least at some point in time in the future for it. It's a brochure and a booklet that's put together called 5 Wishes. So 5 Wishes basically is for helping you and your family plan and receive the care that you want and deserve. So it may not necessarily replace other documents, but it may be something in addition to that you have for it. This booklet, when completed, is accepted in the state of Illinois as a medical power of attorney in that for it, so it can be completed, wishes can be signed, can be notarized in that for it, and then it is yours and you can use it and give it to whoever you want at that point in time for it. So basically the idea behind the 5 wishes is first, identify the person who will make your healthcare decisions for you. Selecting your healthcare agent, would this person be willing to speak on your behalf? So someone that you believe is going to be able to do your wishes for you. Would they be able to act on your wishes separate from his or her feelings? So not necessarily what they would necessarily want to have done, but what it is that you want to have done for it. Do they live close enough so that they would not have to travel necessarily to be by your side? And is the person someone you can trust with your life? Right? So a lot of us will go through these conversations, we'll think about it, is it family members, is it a non-family member that may be important or someone who can conduct these things for us. When you start thinking about medical treatment you want or that you don't want, right? So you do have the ability to tell someone that you do not want to receive medical treatment, right? If there is something that you don't want to receive, commonly referred to as a living will. Identify what life support means to you. So does that mean that something should happen to keep you going at all costs, or is it just to basically keep you comfortable, or what is it that you want to have done with it for it? It also gives space in here to write what you want to have written in, if there's anything specific that you want to do. But it is not a do not resuscitate. So I mean, if you want that would have to be a separate document of that you would have, say, a DNR. A lot of times if you go into a hospital for it, there will be a question will come along, you sign a DNR or that for it. Some people the answer is yes, other people it's no, right? Everybody's situation is different, everybody's beliefs, while maybe similar, still may have different outcomes that they want. So the key to it becomes how comfortable do you want to be? As you're going through this experience, therefore, how comfortable is it that you want to be with regard to what is happening to you? Again, this is happening to you, not to somebody else, right? So you are in control of what you want to have done. You don't have to leave it up to somebody else. And it's important if you have certain wishes or things that you want done or not done, that you have those in writing. Because if you don't have them in writing, then your wishes may not be accomplished, right? So, quick story, when I was power attorney for my uncle and that for it, anytime he would go into the hospital, I always had a copy of the power of attorney with me. First thing that the nurses would ask me when I walked in, I'd say, look, I need to get information on my uncle. They'd say, well, we can't give anything. I'd pull out my power of attorney and then I get all the information that I want. The challenge is that if someone goes back into the hospital, a lot of times they don't keep those documents readily available. They're attached to, so to speak, that file for that day or that week or that they were there for it, and then they move on. So you need to always have kind of a separate copy. One recommendation that I do make is that if you have someone that is a medical power of attorney, that they make a copy of it and put a copy in their glove box of their car. Reason being is, if they ever get a call, if they have to go somewhere for it, they may not be thinking, well, what papers do I need to grab before I head out to the hospital or that for it. If they get to the hospital and they walk up to the room or that for it, the worst they have to do, so to speak, is go back to the car and get the medical power of attorney. Not for property, but for medical. Makes it at least convenient so that if you ever have to get there for it, you got it. When my uncle was alive, I kept a copy in my briefcase. My briefcase is with me pretty much everywhere I go. If I needed to head out, grab my briefcase, I was headed out the door for it. So So it is important that you make sure you put these, this information in writing for it. And one of the big things on here to really keep in mind is, it's how do you want people to treat you? Remember, this is about you, not about somebody else, right? Do you want certain things done? Do you want, what do you want people to remember? Those are all important portions for you. And what do you want your loved ones to know? So inside of the booklet here, basically it'll walk through, it says, who should use 5 wishes? Anyone who's 18 years of age or older, married, single, parent, adults. More than 19 million people have of all ages have already used it because it works well. Lawyers, doctors, hospitals, and hospice, faith communities, employers, and retiree groups are handing out this document. So it is available, and 5 wishes is accepted if you live in District of Columbia or 42 states, and there's 42 states listed below. Illinois is one of the states that this is approved in that way. A lot of times it becomes a question of, if I want to change something, how do I go about changing it? Well, basically, you destroy one document and then just write up another one. But as you walk through it, the key to it becomes, like which one? The person I want to make my healthcare decisions for me when I can't make them for myself. And the person I choose is my agent right? So you're putting that person there in charge to be able to do what you want them to do. Again, if you're going to put someone in charge for it, the key to this is really to understand or have a person in charge that will be able to do what you want to have done, not what they necessarily want to have done. So just because you have your daughter, let's say, as your power of attorney for property, she may or may not be in the best position to make a healthcare decision. Maybe that's your insensitive son. So it's, you want to make sure that the person that you choose is actually going to do what you want, and it's not left up to them to do what they want. Right? I know sometimes these can be difficult conversations to have. That's why something like this, if it's written out, it's in writing, it's kind of black and white for it, it gives someone direction. You don't necessarily have to have that difficult decision if you don't want to. It gives you a way to be able to have a conversation based upon what you've already taken care of in that work. Right? Now, a lot of times, if you're having estate documents done, so if you do your trust and your will, there are generally 2 other powers of attorneys that are drawn up: power of attorney for property, and then a power of attorney for medical, and therefore sometimes a living will is drawn up as well for it. Right? Those are all documents which can also be used in addition to it. But those are documents that at some point in time, especially if you own property, you would potentially need to trust, but we're all going to need at some point in time, right? And if we live long enough, there's certain things that may need to be done about it, right? When you start going through it, the wish 2 portion on it becomes my wish for what kind of medical treatment I want, or more importantly, what treatment I don't want, right? So as you keep in mind, as your caregiver, you don't want to be in pain if that's the thing. You don't want anything done or omitted by doctors and they would help to take your life. You want to be offered food and fluid. If these are all important portions for you, these are the things to be able to convey now while we all have capacity to do so, because if we get into a situation where we are in that situation, you may not have the ability with which to have that conversation with someone for it, right? This is not a do not resuscitate. If you do want that as part of it, then there's a separate form in that to be able to have for it, right? It talks about if you are permanently incapacitated. So if someone is in a coma in that for it, obviously they can't speak for themselves. What kind of medical treatment would you want if that was the case? So when you start to go through this, it really becomes important, and it's very thoughtful, right? As far as when you go through it, what is it that we all are going to want or need to have done for it? And this can be updated, so if life changes, if there's something happens or one of your children moves out of town or something, you want to replace them with somebody else, change who you want on there for it, then you just update the document. You would not be just crossing their name out and actually creating a new one for it, because maybe you have other changes that you have there for, right? The wish 3 is in my wish or how comfortable I want to be. And if there's certain areas that you don't want to be as comfortable in, you can go through and cross those out, initial next to it, so that you know that those are things that you don't want to have done, or things that you do want to have done, right? Wish 4 is my wish for how I want people to treat me. All right? So I want people to help me with when possible. I want people there when it seems that something that might be coming. I wish to be cared with kindness and cheerfulness and not sadness. Right. So we want people to be more positive in that part. This truly does help try and give direction as far as what you want to have done. All right, for it. And then this is wish 5 is my wish for what I want my loved ones to know. I wish to have my family and friends know that I love them. I wish to be forgiven all the times I have hurt my family or friends and others for it. If anyone asks how I want it to be remembered, I want something said there, right? So it gives you a way, again, to convey what you want done, to who it is, and how you want it done for you. Because again, this is all about you. It's not about somebody else. And this becomes very introspective as far as what it is that we're trying to do with it, right? And again, this is kind of one document as part of a whole financial planning or estate planning type document, right? What is it that how does it all tie together? And so I was having a conversation a couple of weeks ago with someone. They're asking about what kind of documents they needed, and it really came down to, well, some of the documents when they're needed, especially with the trust, if you decide to have one written up, the ability inside the trust to be able to specify how you would want your beneficiaries to potentially receive money, right? This client was having a situation where they were talking about legacy planning and how did they, they have 2 children and one child is, pretty responsible, another child is not so responsible. So we started having a conversation. Okay, well, we can design things to be able to protect them from themselves, so to speak, on how the funds can be distributed in that part, right? And that these monies can last a longer period of time for it. So it really becomes, this is just one piece of kind of a bigger puzzle that may need to be done, but all of these documents at some point in time are going to be documents that we all need with which to take care of the things that we want to have taken care of for it. Once you've completed the book on that for it, basically you're signing the form for it. It does need 2 witnesses are needed for it and a notarization. So there's 3 people that would essentially be signing it. The witness can also be the notary, so they need to be 3 separate individuals for it. And then basically what to do once you've completed it is basically, keep a copy for yourselves, keep a copy make a copy for your person that you're going to plan on putting in charge for it, so that they know, so that they have a copy in their for, right? So you make copies of the completed. You can give a copy to your family, your friends, your healthcare agent, and your doctors. So a lot of times, if you have a completed healthcare power and you get a copy to your physician and that for it, they will have it on file, right? So that if anything happens, they know who to contact for it, and also that person also has the ability to get the information, right? A lot of times I will have copies. I will have them saved, so if they needed to be faxed somewhere, I've had clients where I've needed to fax documents over to a hospital or that for it, we've just gone ahead and faxed them over so that they have access to it, right? So the key would be that the people you want to have kind of accessible and in charge of it, they already have this information. It's also something that whoever your healthcare provider or healthcare person that's going to be in charge, you should have a conversation with them about it, all right? And go through it, because you may have, after having that conversation, you may learn that they aren't necessarily willing to do what it is that you want done. A lot of times we make assumptions that, I'll have my son Joe do it because Joe is responsible and he does it, and he gets to the point you have a conversation, and Joe says, I don't think I can do that. I'm not comfortable in doing that for it, right? Well, then you'd have to necessarily potentially find somebody else that would be able to replace Joe at that point in time, right? So the key on it is to make sure that what you want done is going to be done. But more importantly, that when it comes time, that those people who are going to be in charge are going to do what it is that you want completed. Whatever that is. This is a document for you and not for somebody else, right? When you update the 5 wishes, basically, at least you have a significant life event, so if there's a divorce, if there's a medical diagnosis that's come in for it, if you're starting to feel in a decline stage for it, Or obviously if someone passes, then this would no longer be valid for what had to be done, except maybe for the eulogy or that, if there are information in there that they would want to be presented. 77% of people want to make sure that their family is not burdened by tough decisions with their care. So more than 75% of the people who've had conversation want to make sure that there's a, so to speak, seamless transition, that somebody can come in, be able to do things, they don't have to make it more difficult, right? When things start to get difficult is when you have to go for guardianship, and then all of a sudden now you're having to go through the court system and try and get appointed for something. These information, if you can do things ahead of time for it, puts you in a position of control to make sure what you're doing is in control of everything else for it. 85% feel it's important to make sure that their wishes are communicated to their medical care and their medical care follow. So 85% of the people want to make sure that whatever they say is going to get done is going to get done in that form, right? Which is key for everything. So, you know, the key when you start to look at what we have going on is twofold, right? First is to make sure that you have done what you want to have done and completed, therefore. But the second part of it is to make sure that whoever you're going to put in charge is actually going to execute whatever it is that you say that you want done. And those sometimes are not always going to be the same person. Again, everybody has some different perspectives on what they may want or how they want things to be done for, but how does that all come together, right? Remember, these are all your documents. These are things that are set up for you. So I always suggest that if you're having a conversation with your children or that for it, that you can be considerate of their feelings, but it doesn't mean that you necessarily have to execute what it is that they say they want done. It's just kind of like your money, right? If something happens, it's your money. You should be able to do with your money what you want. Your children should be able to do with their money what they want, but they shouldn't be able to tell you what you should do with your money. All right. So, you know, but I do think that, you know, most people I think in this room, is that you want to make sure that whatever you want done is going to be executed at the time and appropriate place for what you want to have done. And if that is the case, then it does take time to potentially go through and create documents, right? Clients will ask me, you know, how often do I need to update my will or my trust or that for? Really depends on your situation, right? I mean, you can, if you create a will today, you don't have to change it at all. It can be executed 35 years from now. Just make sure you know where it's at, or somebody knows where it's at that point, right? But as life goes on, there may be changes that occur, right? There may be family members who we necessarily, you know, who we had as a beneficiary therefore, who may no longer be here. There may be situations where you know that your son or daughter is going through maybe a marital situation and you want to protect them and protect your money to make sure that it goes where you want it to go, right? If you want money to go to your grandchildren, maybe when you drew up your will or your trust, you didn't have any at the time, and now you have grandchildren, so it's like, okay, I want to make sure if something happens to this child, then more money flows to my grandchildren and that forth, right? And all of these documents you get to create, and you get to say what it is that you want done, right? Strongly encourage that before you would go sit down with an attorney to just say, you know, the last thing you want to do is walk in and say, well, I'm here to just have some estate documents done, I want to trust, a will, and that for it, without necessarily a plan as far as what you want said in there. And the reason being is that hourglass keeps running, right? You know, the longer you sit there, the more that hourglass just keeps going along. So I always suggest that when you go to have those documents, you go to have that done, you have either kind of a written outline of what it is that you want to tell the attorney that for it. Because you can walk in and when they say, well, what are you here for today? You can say, well, this is what I want done, right? And then they can glance over it. You know what you want done, they have to put it in the legalese so that it becomes legal and executable and all that for it, right? But it's important to make sure that periodically maybe you do review those. When it comes to powers of attorney, it's going to be medical powers of attorney tend to have a longer life. When you have powers of attorney for property, typically those are only valid, depending on the institution, anywhere from 1 to 5 years. Okay. After that period of time, the document becomes what they would call stale. And you know, I don't know about you, but I've had a lot happen in my life in the last 10 years. There may be another power of attorney. There may be changes in things. They want to make sure if somebody's dealing with your money, they you want to make sure that the appropriate people have the ability with which to conduct business on your behalf, right? So if you have a power of attorney for property, say, oh, I did one about 15 years ago when I had all my stuff put together, it may be time not necessarily to change who you have as your power of attorney, but just to update it. Get a new one, get it on file in that for it, throw the other one away, get it shredded, so that you have all the documents. Yes.
You mentioned power of attorney for property. Does that include finance?
Correct. So the question was power of attorney for property. Power of attorney for property includes banking information, pension information, life insurance, safe deposit box, anything that would be more financially. It would also allow someone to call on your behalf to talk to, let's say, your health insurance company. So if you get a bill in, you say, hey, I don't want to talk to them, go ahead and talk to them about it. That gives them the ability to do so. They can't, that's separate from your medical, right? So if you're dealing with the health insurance company for payment or that for, that's going to be a medical, that's not going to be a medical situation, it's going to be a financial situation, right? The medical would be when you were in the hospital or you're going to see the doctor, what needed to be done at that point in time for it. So having those documents and having them up to date are always very important. It's also very important, if you're having a conversation the other day with someone, to make sure that your beneficiaries for your accounts are all updated as well, right? And if possible, not only to have a potential primary beneficiary, but also list the contingent beneficiary. Now, if you have your trust as a beneficiary, everything would flow into the trust, and the trust would divide out how everything would go at that point in time. But if you don't have a trust, you want to leave it to individuals, I highly encourage you to have not only a primary, but also a contingent. Yes?
Power of attorney. Certain age, you have to be.
So the question is, in order to be power of attorney, yes, they would have to be at least a legal person, they have to be at least 18 years of age or older. Because other than that, they would be a minor, and a minor cannot make decisions. So they have to be 18. Yes?
Two questions. The first is some of the power of attorney for help. Let's say the document, the primary, I believe there's a secondary.
There can be a secondary listed, I mean, for the person that would be allowed to give, to make changes or get information. So,
If something happens to me, the next person in line would be able to have the same power.
correct. You can have that on there,
You
yes.
can't have that. And the reason I asked that question, let's say, the example you gave with your uncle, let's say I was secondary. Let's say they couldn't get in touch with me. Let's say he oversees something. Can I
Sure.
take the document and represent, or do I?
I would have to say that I was, so the question is, if there's a secondary person, do they just kind of automatically step in? The answer is yes, as long as they can verify that I'm not available, right? So if I'm on a trip in China, let's say, and I have something that says I'm going overseas and therefore I'm not gonna be available for comment or, being called to that for it, then yes, whoever the secondary person is would step up to be able to answer or take care of the decision there.
The second question, going back to our attorney for property, that person doesn't have authority to change beneficiaries, right?
Well, the question is, so on power of attorney for property, do they have the ability to change beneficiaries? The answer is possible. If you've written on the power of attorney that they have the ability to change beneficiaries, then yes, they can. If you don't have that on there, then no, they cannot. So they cannot change beneficiaries if they are not, because they can't change your wishes, they have to just execute what it is you want done, right? So, but there have been instances where I've had attorneys who have had it in there where this power of attorney can change beneficiaries. And as long as you sign it and authorize it, then they would be able to change beneficiaries, okay? But if not, then, if you don't have that in there, then no, they would not be able. Yes?
Okay, for the power of attorney for property, is that the only document that have to be updated in 5 years?
The question is on the power of attorney for property, is that the only one that would need to be updated? Most likely, unless you've had other changes with regard to your trust or that for it. You typically would not have to update that if that's accurate. Your will of who you have in there and where you want monies to go is set up, you wouldn't need that. And on the medical one, that typically just continues until they get something else for it. But the property one, unless it's on an account, So if you have a power of attorney for property, you take it into the bank and you say, here's my power of attorney, I wanna make sure, I wanna get this on there. They may have that person come in and sign the document, sign the new signature card, just so that they know that they have a signer on file for it. Then you typically would not have to do it. They will just assume that that is still valid until they get a new one in. If, however, they don't have that information and you just walk in and say, now it's 8 years later, you say, here, I want to put this on there, they're most likely not going to accept it. They're most likely going to tell you, well, go get a new one, go get this one re-notarized, get it updated in some form or fashion. Because remember, when they start dealing with your money, the last thing they want to have to do is deal with any legal situations whereby somebody would be getting sued to say, hey, you gave my money to so-and-so, you didn't have the authority, I had another power of attorney, but well, I said, so we gave us this one, yeah, but that one was 8 years old, and this one here is 2 months old, right? So when it comes to when it comes to dealing with financial matters in that court, unless the powers of attorney are on file with the company at the time for it, then it is recommended that you get those updated. For example, when I was with Citibank was 365 days. On day 366, assuming it wasn't a leap year at that point in time, they would require a new power of attorney. So different companies have different rules, and remember, it's their rules, right? So you may say, well, this doesn't make any sense, and it may not make any sense to you. That doesn't mean that that's not what they have in their. I was dealing with a client not too long ago with one of the banks here in town, and it was arduous. It was just, they were going through everything. We went through 3 different powers of attorney that we had to have signed before they would finally accept the documents that we had. And there were little things on there, like we had a person that had witnessed it for it, but that person's name wasn't written in this one spot. Like, really? And we said, we'll just write it, no, we can't do it, we need all new documents. So we had to go back to it and review all the documents. It was becoming very difficult because the client was kind of in declining health in that for it. So trying to get things taken care of was very challenging. So, the power of attorney for medical is obviously someone that you should want to have a conversation with, and therefore the power of attorney of property, while you have it written, you may not want that person to know at that point in time. Right? And that's fine. That's up to you to be able to have that and keep it kind of quiet for it. But just make sure the documents are available and ready should someone ever need to execute or have to do anything. Yes?
Am I accurate in saying that there are 2 types of power of attorney?
Correct. The question is, there are 2 types of power of attorney. The answer is yes. One is power of attorney for property, which would be for financial matters in that for it. The second one is power of attorney for healthcare, which would be a medical power of attorney or a living will, or potentially the 5 wishes, or something along those lines, right? So there are different types, and it is important to have the appropriate documents at the right time, right? So it's always important, again, when you talk about beneficiaries and that for it, to go ahead and make sure that the beneficiaries have been updated. A lot of times things happen, they don't get changed in that for it. It could be a number of years before something, between things happening there for it, and we find out that things weren't updated, and now all of a sudden have a lot of problems trying to get things completed and challenges that can go along with it. Because again, a lot of the financial companies, if you're dealing with it, they're going to have their own rules that you have to go ahead and abide by, even though they may not make any sense to you. It's what their rules and that they have to do with, right? So again, go through those if you get those updated for it, and things are fine. Just like, for myself, I have my wife as my primary beneficiary, but then I have our children all listed as contingent. Right? So this way, if anything happens to both of us at the same time, then at least I don't have to worry that they would have a lot of financial issues that they would have to go through. They'd be able to pretty much go through and take care of everything. Yes? So the question is, for the contingents, could you have them as a group or an individual? I guess it's truly up to you and what the company will accept, right? So so if you want to say just all my children and just leave it as a general group, then it would be that for it. It's still preferable to list them out individually for it, because this way everybody has a name and is associated with it. As children, then they have to verify how many children you have, they have to verify birth certificates and all that. If somebody's name is written there for it, and sometimes it's just updating it, so if your daughter gets married and she changes her name and that for it, it could be as simple as just updating that information, because if anything would happen, and she went to claim the benefits of that for it, and she has her driver's license which shows her married name on it, that's not necessarily the person who's on the document, right? So that she might need a birth certificate for that to show that her name was what it was due. Yes? Oh, the MIB report.
Yeah,
Okay.
okay. If you don't, it's best to check on them because they do make mistakes. My thing is, they made a mistake on me. They said I had congestive heart failure. The doctor don't know anything about it. So we all put it up this thing. You know, they did a mistake. It's hard to get it out of your report.
So the question was about getting your medical reports updated. Yes, it is important that you get those corrected for it. If you were to apply for insurance or something, they would say, well, you said you had heart failure, you know, we're not gonna insure you at that point for it. You're like, what are you talking about? I never had heart failure at that point. Certain times, sometimes it is important to go through and have a conversation or maybe look at your medical records, because sometimes as doctors are doing things, it's better today because things are all on the computer, maybe, right? But if they get paper documents or paper things that are out there, or all of a sudden, something could end up, they're pushing papers around, something ends up in your folder that's not yours, and it just may be, and you do have the legal right to take your medical files with you or get a copy of them. So if you wanted to take your files with you, go to another doctor, therefore, you could actually go in and say, hey, I want a copy of my files, or I want to take my file with me to go somewhere else, right? So you can't actually do that, so it's your legal right to be able to do so. Any other questions on that? Yes?
Just to know, once, you have power of attorney, once those rollover payments, that's terminated.
Right, so the question was with regard to power of attorneys and their longevity. Power of attorney ceases when someone passes. All right? So if someone passes and you walk in with a power of attorney, you say, well, okay, I'm here to conduct business. That power of attorney is no longer valid. Now it goes to someone's estate, whatever the estate says. So if it's the will, or a small estate affidavit, or something of that nature, that's what's going to now take precedence over it. That's why if anybody has a safe deposit box for it, if you do, there should be at least 3 people on that box, if they will allow it. Let's say you and your wife, or you and your spouse for that for it, and potentially a third person, right? Son, daughter, someone like that, or potentially having your trust own the box, right? Trusts have perpetuity, so if the trust is the owner, you're signing it as a trustee of that for it. Some banks will not allow that, some will, but if you do that, then you know that can go on. The problem is once something happens and nobody who has the legal right to get into the box is on the box for it, some banks will not allow you in. Some banks will allow you to go in and get the will or the trust for that for it, right? Again, it's their rules. They get to say what happens or what transpires at that point, right? So, you want to make sure that there's the least amount of problems possible, which for somebody, because usually that's where all the important papers are, right? That's usually where the trust is at, that's where the will's at, that's maybe where the life insurance is at, that's where all of the documents are that you would potentially say, here, go to this place, and this is where everything's at. Well, if they can't get into that, how can they then execute what it is that you want done? All right. So it's important that you go through and get those updated. If you do update your power of attorney, then obviously you may need to update and change that. You may need to change the person who can sign or access it for it. But if you do have a power of attorney, you want them to be able to get in your box. it'd be advisable to have them sign, give a copy to the bank so that they could be in on their at least access, right? The whole key is accessible. If it's not accessible, then it doesn't really matter at that point, right? Because if I can't get into it, we'll do this, right? So doing some minor things up front can really prevent some major obstacles down the road. Right? Yes?
In some cases, they might require you to get a small affidavit in order to get in the box, and that takes a little time.
Well, the statement was sometimes they might require what's called a small estate affidavit. In the state of Illinois, a small estate affidavit is if someone's estate is less than $100,000, then that you don't necessarily need to file a will in that for it. It allows, because the estate is under $100,000, for that to be basically done quickly and therefore not having to file. If your estate's over $100,000, then you would have to go through probate. There would be situations where you would have potentially letters of office that would be issued, and that accordingly. Yes.
You have to make sure, once you get, I guess for some companies, once you get the power of attorney or small affidavit, for the state or this regular power of attorney, because they separate to make sure that when you file with the company, that they put on there, like what things, like, for example, savings account and a checking account. Now, the company may inadvertently just say you have, power of attorney over the checking account, and not necessarily the savings.
Right, so the comment is that if you do go into the bank or the institution there for it, and you have multiple accounts there for it, you want to make sure that you're having that power of attorney applicable to all of the accounts. So if you have a checking and a savings account, you go see them, and maybe there are two different ways on there for it, that you say, okay, well, they took their checking account, but the savings account they can't access at that point in time, right? So you just want to verify that everything is there for it. Some institutions, if there's a power of attorney on the title of the titling of the account, it will say, let's say Milton Flanagan, and then it'll just say POA. It won't necessarily list who my POA is, but it'll just say POA so that they know that there's a power of attorney on file for it. The same with if you have accounts and there's either a TOD, a transfer on death situation for it. If you have an account and you don't have beneficiaries on it, then typically it just says Milton Flanagan with no TOD listed below it. But if I have beneficiaries listed for it, it would be Milton Flanagan TOD. It will not list out who the beneficiaries are, but you can now tell by the titling that there are beneficiaries on that account. Right. Yes?
You said something about power of attorney ceases at a particular time. What is
Power of
that?
attorney ceases when someone passes. So there's
That's
no,
when they kick in, when someone passes.
no, power of attorney can kick in at any point in time. So power of attorney, you could be power of attorney today for somebody and be able to get the information either for medical or for financial. So when my dad was alive, I was power of attorney. He was still here. He could theoretically go in and take care of business, anything, but he didn't really want to. So I took care of all that. So I had my power of attorney. After my mom passed, I had my power of attorney updated so that I made sure that I was prime, because I was secondary. Mom had passed, so I moved myself up to the primary portion for it. And then he had a secondary person listed there for it. I took those documents, I went into the bank, updated anything that he had where it was just in him and my mom's name in that for it, so that I could now get access and information for it. So power of attorney is valid before someone passes. Once someone passes, then someone's will or estate kicks in at that point. So whatever your will says, and that's where you need either a small estate affidavit or potentially letters of office or court to be able to conduct business.
Okay, on some banks, they have the beneficiaries of POD. What's POD?
Payable on death.
Payable
So,
on death.
so a transfer on death or POD is payable on death. Basically, those are beneficiary listings, right? So if you see those on an account, like I've had a client came in just recently that we were looking at her account. She had some stock we were going to transfer over for it. I looked at the titling on her account. I said, "There's an issue. There's a problem with your account with this company." She said, "Well, what do you mean? There's no problem. I keep getting my dividends and that for you." I said, "No." I said, "There's no beneficiary list." They said, well, what do you mean there's no beneficiary? So I can tell by the titling of your account here for it, it doesn't say TOD or POD, so I know that if something were to happen to you, you have an issue. Right now, you can either update it or not, that's up to you, but the issue is there, right? So,
You also have POA. What was POA?
power of attorney,
Oh, that's it? Okay.
POA stands for power of attorney, right? So, when you're power of attorney, POA for the medical or financial. Any other questions? Yes.
A power of attorney for health purposes, should one develop, acquire that entity when he or she is in relatively good health, or when one's health is in decline?
So the question is, when would be the best time to get a power of attorney? The best time to get a power of attorney is when you are in best health, right? Be it financial or for medical for it. Because as you start to decline, you may not be in the best mental capacity with which to make those decisions at that point, which could potentially, so power of attorneys could potentially then be challenged if that's the case. Right, if you appoint person A and person B thinks they should be in charge, and you're not necessarily in solid standing to that point, then that document can be ruled invalid. Right? So it's best to get everything done while you still have the capacity to be able to do so. Either for medical or for financial. Yes.
Does the power of attorney supersede your spousal? If you're married, does the spouse
So-
is not the benefit?
So the question is, if you are married, if your spouse is not listed as your power of attorney, does that supersede? And the answer is no. Just because you're married doesn't necessarily mean that your spouse has to be your power of attorney. For either for medical or for financial, right? So it may be a situation where, let's say, a husband says, my wife would not be able to pull the plug on me if I wanted the plug pulled, right? So maybe he has his son or his daughter or someone else at that point in time, right? For financial, if it's somebody who's not necessarily good with financial matters, you may not want them dealing with your money, right? If that's the case now. So it would not necessarily be unreasonable to say, no, I don't want this person because I love them, I'm married to them, but I don't want them dealing with financials if we have to get into a tough situation here for it. I want someone that can deal with that more logically or situation on that basis for it. You can appoint it. That's why these are your documents. They are not somebody else's. They are your documents. They're signed by you. They're written by you to do your wishes. All right? That's why I said earlier, don't let your children tell you how to spend your money. Right? You earned it. You can spend your money and do with your money what you want. Let them make their money. They can choose to do with their money, and they won't listen to you if you try and tell them what to do with their money. So why should you listen to them and tell them, right? So if you want to do it, that's fine. But just because they want you to do it doesn't necessarily mean that that's the best thing for what you want to do. Yes.
Okay. If you have beneficiaries on everything, and let's say that you become
Incapacitated?
yeah, that was,
Okay.
yeah. Can your children, let's say you have a stroke and you can't take care of your business anymore, what kind of problems would they run into trying to maybe write checks for you or take care of your business
So
and stuff
those are
like that?
those are two kind of separate questions. One has to do with beneficiaries, the other has to do with kind of a power of attorney situation. Beneficiaries do not get involved with an account until you're passing, right? So they don't have any say. I mean, they only they're a passive person until something actually happens, right? What you're referring to is if you're incapacitated, that's where you would need your powers of attorney.
What if you don't have that?
Then there's a problem. Then they would have to go potentially to get guardianship for it, right? They'd have to go to court to say that you're no longer either physically or mentally capable of taking care of your business. They have to apply for guardianship to be able to conduct business. Then with the guardianship is a court-ordered situation. So they are responsible to the court. So typically, on an annual basis, they would have to come back with a listing of all the activities that occurred in your accounts for the year. That says you wrote checks for all these places, you had to provide, it started with $1,000 in the account, you ended there's $1,000 in the account, or if you start with $1,000 and there's $2 in the account, what happened to the other almost $1,000 that's there for it? You have to do an accounting for it. If you're a power of attorney, you don't have to. Right? So that's why you want to have these documents ahead of time while you still have capacity to be able to produce them. Because if it becomes too late, then it can't be done. It's just like trying to get a will done when you've been diagnosed with Alzheimer's, right? It can't be done, because, I mean, maybe it could be contested, because it was done at a time when maybe you didn't understand what it is that you were saying. And if someone's left out, and they thought they should have been in, well, maybe you just forgot about them because you weren't mentally capable of the time, right? So there's a lot that can go behind the scenes, and it's, you know, it's kind of like it doesn't matter until it matters, and once it matters, it's too late, right? You know, you have to have the insurance before the house burns down, not after the house burns down, right? Doesn't help afterward. You gotta have it beforehand, right? So having the documents ahead of time obviously can prevent a lot of potential challenges down the road in that board. Any other questions on that? Yes.
The small affidavit you mentioned,
Yes.
that amount, $100,000, this is Illinois, that amount, depending on what state.
So the question was about a small estate affidavit. In Illinois, it's $100,000. Each state has its own limit for it. I believe Michigan's is $16,000 for it. Illinois' used to be, I think, till about 10 years ago, was about $50,000 at that point. Now it's $100,000, and that's for the small state. Every state has the right to set their own limits for it, right? So if you're in Arkansas, maybe it's $5,000. But it's somewhere where each state on that, and typically if you're doing a small estate affidavit, typically what accompanies that is what's called an affidavit of domicile, which says that that person resided in that state, or they were a resident of that state. So if you were in Illinois, let's say they had an account in Illinois, but they resided in Missouri. Well, they weren't a resident of Illinois. So Missouri law may take precedent at that point in time, even though they're trying to, so it's a small estate affidavit for Missouri because that's where their legal residence was at the time that something happened. Right. So it is something to take your attorney. An attorney can do it. Sometimes you can print the documents out. It depends on your situation. Yes. They could. So
that you were part of a spouse. Maybe had the same
right. So the comment was that, you know, with regard to a safe deposit box, you may be able to use a small estate affidavit. Maybe. Depends on the institution. The institution may not accept a small estate affidavit. They may want the courts to verify that you are the legal person who has access to it. Again, we're dealing with your money. You start dealing with the money in that court, sometimes especially financial institutions get very, very particular because they don't want to get sued. Right? They don't want somebody to come in and say, okay, you gave my money to Joe and I was supposed to get it. Right? That's a problem with that.
Another point is should not the financial institution or the court to be the loader of the court to one of their employees. So don't do that. Go to another bank, or another place and get the company notarized. So they can't say it's a conflict of interest.
So the comment was if you go to one bank and the safe deposit document says there, you may want to have the notary done at a different institution so they can't say that there was collusion or that happened later. So that is something that can be done as well. Any other questions? Okay. Just to follow up on a couple areas for it. So we spoke not too long ago about Tier 1 and Tier 2 for the state employees, and therefore anybody hired after 2011 has to be Tier 2, and Tier 1 is prior to that. Well, there was an article in the paper a couple weeks ago, and I didn't realize this, but the reason that that you're able to have a municipal, county, or state pension is that by law it has to be at least, the benefits have to be at least similar to what Social Security would be. Right? So in this article, what it was saying is that basically Tier 2 employees, within the next 10 years, given how the state of Illinois has structured that program, and this talked more about school districts and that for it, that those benefits that those people would receive, now 2011, we're 8 years in, right? So in 10 more years, we could be hitting the point where those people could potentially be retiring, right? Maybe they were 45, they started, now they're 65, right? So we're coming up on it. In the article, basically what it said is that the benefits at that point in time might be less than what they would receive from Social Security, which would mean that the school district now has to provide at least 10 years worth of payments to Social Security. Anybody own property here? Where do they typically go when they need revenue for stuff? Not saying they would, but that was my first thought, was okay, so I'm a property tax owner, 10 years from now, this goes belly up or whatever, and the school district now has to come up with 10 years worth of payment. Now remember, as an employee, you've been paying into tier 2 as a pension, so that would mean, I think, didn't say in the article, but I think they would have to come up with basically 12.4% for 10 years, take the average of the 10 years, and write a lump sum check to Social Security. Didn't go into that kind of detail, that's kind of what I would think would happen with it. Now imagine if there's, I don't know, 10, 20, 30 employees that they now have to do that for, right? So it was very enlightening, or scary, I guess, you know, when I started thinking more about it, as to, okay, 10 years from now, this situation, approximately, you could have a situation where this would be underwater, and these people are expecting payments for it, but now as a property tax owner, or just a tax-paying citizen of the state, and that for it, where is that money now gonna come from, right? I mean, if you have Social Security, and you log into SSA.gov, it will tell you how much you paid into Social Security over the last 30 years, or 40 years, or however long you've been paying into Social Security. It'll also tell you what your employer paid in over the last period of time, right? Imagine having to take, maybe not for 40 years, but having to take 10 years worth of those payments, and having to write a check tomorrow to basically pay to be able to cover those payments. Right? That's why I said, wow. I was reading the article, I actually sent an email to the person because I had a question saying, well, what about when Tier 1 goes out of business? I mean, since public pensions by Supreme Court ruling are not guaranteed, then would that mean that, just picking school districts as an entity for it, would that mean that they would then have to come back somehow and fund the school? And I'm assuming that that would also apply to the city of Chicago, right? So we all heard how bad the city's pensions are with regard to it, right? So if that's the case, would they then have to then come back and come up with payments for that, right? So recently, you may have seen some ads on the paper trying to justify the progressive tax portion for it. I just have a question. Did anybody know taxes were contributions? Yeah, I had that same reaction. So Pritzker contends that residents earning up to $250,000 would pay the same or less, while the very wealthy would contribute more. I didn't know that taxes were a contribution. Right? So if I happen to make more than that, since it's a contribution, do I get to deduct those off my federal taxes as a deduction? I mean, I didn't know that these were contributions. Somehow I didn't think I had a choice. I thought these were just, I thought they were kind of a mandatory situation for it. So I know April 15th is right around the corner. So now you can feel very fortunate. You can make your contribution to the federal or the state of Illinois. They'll be happy to take your contribution. So I just found that very, very enlightening, that I didn't know that all this time it had been contributed. I thought somehow I was being taxed. I just found that kind of funny for it. So there was also an article talking about this portion for it, talking about the progressive tax that we're talking about here for it. So only one state has adopted a progressive income tax in the past 30 years, and that was Connecticut. A nutmeg state, switched from a flat tax in '96, phasing in the progressive tax over 3 years. Politicians there made all the same promises some Illinois politicians, including Pritzker, are making today. First, they included that the middle class would see a tax cut. Second, a progressive tax would ease the property tax burden. And third, they said they would stabilize state finances. And finally, they said that they would help the poor and disadvantaged. The results are in. The typical Connecticut household has seen a 13% increase in their income taxes since 1999, when the progressive tax rate was fully paid. Right? So, you know, as I was telling somebody the other day, Illinois does not have a revenue problem, we have a population problem. In that probably by the time 2020 rolls around, we'll have lost probably 2 million or more residents of the state. Right? That's why in 2010 we lost House seats, right? 2020 we'll probably lose more House seats in that board, right? So if you lose approximately 2 million people, what aren't those 2 million people doing? They're not buying things in the state of Illinois. They're not paying. They're not contributing. If they work, they're not paying. They're not contributing to the state's tax bucket, right? If they own property, they're not paying property taxes for it, right? So imagine if you had 2 million more people here in the state, that could potentially solve a lot of problems, right? Since you don't, you've got a lot of issues now, right? So. So I think the issue becomes that for it, and then it's not necessarily the revenue portion for it, it's potentially the expense portion of it, right? The day after that Pritzker was signed in, he signed into law and said he was going to give all the raises that Rauner said he wasn't. I've yet to hear where the money's coming from. It was approximately, I think, $125 million, was the number I heard for it. Where's that money gonna come from to make those payments?
I thought that was his bank account.
It was coming out of his bank account? No. He had to take all the toilets out of his house, so he wouldn't have to pay, and then only when he got chained into it, he paid it back. Some I don't understand how he's not in prison for that, but that's, I thought that was fraud, but that's a different story, I guess. So when they started looking at it, you have these issues that are all there, not necessarily the tax revenue for it. And I don't know, does anybody ever remember the temporary tax? When Edgar was in office, anybody remember this? Edgar was in office, Daley was in office for it, and at the time, the state's tax rate, I believe, was like 2.75. And so they said, well, Chicago needed this temporary tax by the state to be able to get their finances in order. So it went from, I believe, like 275 to 375, or 3 to 3.75. And it was only supposed to be for like 4 or 5 years. Lo and behold, after the 3 or 4 or 5 years came, they said, you know what, we can't do without this, this other 75, 0.75 tax on it, so it became permanent at that point. And I told my wife at the time, I said, I've never seen a temporary tax not become a permanent tax, so I think it's called a permanent tax, right? But I don't know if anybody remembers that. I mean, that was probably the early part of the century in that for like 2002, 2003, something like that for it. It was amazing because somehow it just became permanent. I didn't know how that happened. It was definitely supposed to be temporary, right? Well, we talked about double-digit raises now, but I mean, it's just funny how these temporary things become permanent when it comes to the federal or the taxing bodies and that for it. Couple other things. Illinois, for building a house in Illinois, we're almost at the top of the list on the upside down it. We're number 44, so there's only six states higher than Illinois if you were to try and build a house in it. Estimated cost to build a house in Illinois, roughly $223,000. Hourly cost, $27.01. Illinois has the 8th highest estimated cost to build a home. However, it has the highest labor cost, tied with Hawaii. Just reading what it said. I didn't make it up. It was right there. So if you see why people might not be, wanting to do that, and then, keeping on that same positive note for it, the 25 states that will make you regret retiring there. We're pretty good at this. We're only number 19. All right, so we're not quite as good as what we normally are for it. So it's some things there for it. And then a couple things. 48% of households headed by at least age 55 have no retirement savings. So basically half of the 48%, so almost 50% of all households in America headed by individuals with at least 55 years of age have no retirement savings. 26% have a defined contribution plan, 401k. IRA, but no defined pension plan. The remaining 26% have both a defined benefit plan as well as a defined contribution. So people are not saving for retirement for it. I mean, basically almost half of the population that are 55 and older have no retirement portion therefore. The average interest rate in a 30-year fix, if someone's thinking about buying a house for it, was roughly 4.06% last week, the lowest levels of 2019. As recently as November of last year, the 30-year mortgage was 4.94. So rates have come down. If you are thinking about refinancing, it could make sense to refinance, keeping that for it. And then earlier this week, because this came out on Monday, in 1991, it was the 53rd NCAA basketball. Duke beat Kansas 72-65. So if you're a Kansas fan, it wasn't a good day. If you're a Duke fan, it was. Any other questions? Anything else I can help you with today?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
What company do you represent?
I'm with Flanagan Financial Services through our broker, my broker dealer is Woodbury. Any other questions? Yes.
We got a new mayor.
Yes, there will be a new mayor.
One now, right?
Well, she's not sworn in yet, so she will be, yes. Well,
When the tax comes out.
so the question, are you asking for my opinion? Or just, so the question was, now that there's a new mayor for Chicago, do I think that there will be lower taxes? If you're a property tax owner, I would hold on to your wallet, because I think you're going to see property taxes increase. I found it interesting, I didn't listen to the whole speech, because I got bored with it, but there was one section of the speech that struck me for it, in that she said, someone recently who was, I believe, 18, came up to her and asked her, they were headed off to college, and they said, why should I come back to Chicago when I graduate? So I was like, okay, this should be a good answer. And her answer was, well, we need to make things so that people who come back to Chicago when they graduate. Well, that was a perfect time to have like a 3 bullet point of, we're going to do X, Y, and Z, right? This is what we're going to do, and this is how we're going to get people to come here. She talked about population leaving Chicago. I don't want to be negative, but I think that trend's going to continue because there's no reason why to move it, right? We just saw, building a house is one of the most expensive in the country. Sales taxes are, I think, if not the highest, one of the highest in the country. Property taxes are outrageous. If you own property, you know what I'm talking about for it, right? So if you were living in another state, pick a state, I don't know, Missouri. Why would you what would be an incentive for you to move to Chicago? The low tax rate? Low taxes, you talk about going up. It's property taxes? No. Well, you could potentially make more money, but as my dad told me, it's not what you make, it's what you keep. Right? So I can make more, but if I pay twice as much, it's like, okay. I believe it was last year, it was either last year or year before, Toyota, who had their corporate headquarters in Southern California for like 40 years, moved from Southern California to a suburb of Dallas, Plano, Texas, I believe, right? Those people who worked for Toyota in California that moved to Texas immediately saw on average a 9% increase in their income, even if their income stayed the same. Reason being, first is, average California tax is around 9% or so, right? Okay, so if I don't have to pay that tax, because Texas has 0 personal income tax, right? I just increase my income by 9%, right? Property taxes in California are higher, about the same or if not higher than they are in Chicago or Illinois. And property taxes in Texas tend to be pretty low. So if they own property out there and they relocated and made the same amount of money that they were making there, they then made more money. Right? So I don't know for a fact, 'cause I didn't go through Toyota's statements, but I would assume that they probably didn't pay a lot of people to move, paying them increase their wages because they were, by virtue of moving, they were making more money. Now contrast that with Illinois. Right? If you were in Texas, you were, why would you, and you were making, pick a number, $80,000, and you could move to Illinois and make $90,000, but cost you more in your property taxes, cost you more in your income taxes, cost you more in other tax areas, are you really any better off? And you'd have to do the analysis. I've done the analysis for a client. She was thinking about retiring. She worked for the state. She was gonna retire. We looked at, when she was working, she has to pay state income tax, right? That's what you pay, right? As a pensioner, you don't pay any state income tax, at least at this point in time. I'm not trying to get them to change it, I'm just telling you right now, right? Okay? By her pension was gonna be, I think, on average, I don't know, like $10,000 less than what she's currently making. There was no financial incentive for her to keep working. Other than that, she liked working because it kept her busy and everything else. Other than that, from a financial standpoint, she made more money retired that she actually kept. Because remember, she didn't have to pay taxes on it. She had her retirement plan or deferred compensation plan, which we took money out of it, again, not taxed at the state level in that work, right? Those numbers added up to her total income area for it, but again, she didn't have to pay taxes, state income taxes on those monies, right? She made more money not working than she did working. Okay? So, I mean, if you ask me about, it's kind of a long-winded answer, I guess, to your question, I think you're probably going to see higher taxes. I think you're going to see, there was also in the speech, which I heard, they were going to cut down bureaucracy so that they could get permits faster, and I said, well, I guess it just depends when they pay off, right? If you pay somebody off, you're going to want faster, right? That's just how it works, so, not saying, I'm just saying, you know, it's kind of a known entity. So, I just think, I don't think you're going to see anything really change. I think you're going to see, I don't see a lot of businesses wanting to come in, because, you know, it's like, well, we have to get businesses, but then businesses don't pay enough, and they don't do this, and they don't do this, so why would businesses want to come in? There was an article that McDonald's, if you've been reading, you know, that everybody wants this, their $15 wage in the airport, right? McDonald's just bought a company for roughly, I think it was $300 million to basically improve their touch screens and their cafes and everything for it, right? If they spent $300 million there, what don't they need? Exactly. They don't need somebody behind the counter to plug in your order. You're just going to walk up to this kiosk and say, I want this hamburger or that drink or wherever it is, right? So, and there were articles last year about companies who have created machines that can flip burgers. If I can buy a machine that can flip a burger, I only need somebody to push a button, so to speak, or I need somebody to help clean up or that for it, but the potentially number of people I need are going to be less, right? Because technology will take over. So the faster you increase, you force businesses that make that expense, they will find technological ways to improve their efficiencies to maintain their business model. So I think on a long-term basis, I just don't think you're going to see much of a change. I didn't hear anything that made me think, and quite honestly, between, I think it was one of the lowest voter turnouts in Chicago history for it, because I think the total number turned out to be like a total votes for the two were about less than 500,000, I think, right? So if it's less than 500,000 in Chicago, I believe has a population of about 3.5 to 4 million people, and the proper for it at least, right? That's only 10. That's less than 10% of the whole population voted, right? And I think the people that didn't vote basically said it's not going to matter, so who cares? And we're going to pay taxes anyway, so what's going to be different? So.
They keep talking about $15 raise, you know, $15 minimum wage. But then you think about, we're talking, projecting this years ahead, so it's still gonna be the same amount.
Well,
It's not really
the
like-
question on the $15, so there's, I'm from Illinois, so call me cynical, okay? I think the whole thing for the $15 has nothing to do about getting people $15 now.
Right.
Absolutely nothing, okay? It has everything about what happens if you make $10 versus if you make $15. You pay more in state taxes, right? Right? I mean, you made $5 more an hour, so you're going to pay more. You just basically had a 50% increase in the tax that you pay, right? So it's not like, and then you have to remember, to the employer, it's not just the dollars that are being paid. The employer also has, it's another 6.2% for Social Security they have to pay, another 1.45% that they're paying for Medicare, right? So it's not just the increase in the dollars for it, it's the total increase of the cost of what it is, right? So you have to look at the total cost picture. And it's easy, it sounds good, but it's a proven fact. The faster you raise minimum wages, the quicker you get higher unemployment. Because it becomes a focus. Any other questions? Thank you very much. You have yourselves a great day.